In today's episode of the show, we are joined by the nation's restaurant news editor-in-chief, Sam Oches. I've been reading Sam's stuff forever, so it was such a privilege to have him on the show to learn about what he continues to see in the restaurant space in 2025 and beyond. He shares a ton of insights as to where restaurants are being successful in spite of the trends, in spite of the macroeconomic conditions, and what restaurants can do to insulate themselves from those situations. If you don't know me, my name is Jeremy Julian. I am the Chief Revenue Officer for CBS North Star. We sell the North Star point of sale solution for multi units. Please check us out at cbsnorthstar.com. And now, on to the show. I thank everyone out there for joining us. Today, I am joined by a very special guest. I've been reading what Sam has been writing for quite some time, and just kind of in the world of restaurants and restaurant articles. But Sam, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to our audience? For those that I am certain everybody's read a lot of what you've written and probably recognize the face because you guys have been getting a little bit more digital with your podcast as well. But for those that are living under a rock and haven't seen you out there on the social world and whatnot, introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure. Well, thank you, Jeremy, for having me. Really a pleasure to be here. So I'm Sam Oches. I'm the editor-in-chief of Nation's Restaurant News, the editorial director for NRN and our sister publication, Restaurant Hospitality. I've been covering food service for almost 16 years now, and I count myself as the luckiest guy on the face of the earth that I get to do this for a living. So, of course, Nation's Restaurant News, a trade publication for the restaurant industry, totally free for qualified operators. NRN.com. I have an amazing team that is cranking out content every single day on the website. We also have a print publication, Nation's Restaurant News, and everybody can go out and subscribe to that. But yes, we do lots of multimedia now. I have a podcast called Takeaway with Sam Oches. We also have a podcast called Extra Serving that myself and our executive editor, Alicia Kelso, host. And then also all the social accounts. We're constantly going that direction. So very exciting industry to cover. Again, very lucky that I get to do this. Very happy to be here. Thanks, Jeremy.
Awesome. I appreciate you being on. And I know we talked a little bit, Joanna's been on the show. I just recorded with Alicia, but haven't published it yet. So we'll get these things out there. But really from my perspective, we're recording this in early 2025. Sam, I'd love for you to kind of just talk macro restaurants. What are you seeing trends? What are you seeing working well? Let's start down the path of what's been working really well, and then maybe we'll get into kind of where do you see some opportunities to make some investments and change some behavior in some brands.
Sure. I think what's working well, I've talked a lot about a certain handful of restaurant companies in the past several months, as far as companies that I think brands that everybody should look to as being examples of what to do. And there are four in mind that come to mind: Texas Roadhouse, Chick-fil-A, Raising Cane's, and Jersey Mike's. So when I look at what is successful, who's doing a good job right now, those four are the ones that they seem to be immune from any economic changes, any global pandemics. They continue to perform extraordinarily well. And what I would glean from those companies is that what's working right now is consistency, is an intense focus on quality and on hospitality and on not innovating for innovation's sake. Those four companies in particular, a wide range of ages. Of course, Chick-fil-A and Jersey Mike's have been around 50, 60 years, and Texas Roadhouse and Raising Cane's for about 30 years. All of them are either founder-led or founder-inspired. They're still very much playing by the playbook of the founder, and none of them make any rash decisions. They're not
Mhm.
rushing into any marketing campaign, any value deal, any new product, any TikTok inspired whatever. They are just head down. We're going to do this very well, and we're going to do it over and over and over again. And all of them, if you look at their numbers, are just absolutely crushing it. They're all doing between Jersey Mike's from a sandwich concept, about 2.5 to 3 million AUV. The other three are doing over 5 million AUV, right? So I think that's a broad way to answer your question, Jeremy. But I think what's working right now is those companies that, no matter the volatility of what we're going through right now from an economic standpoint, from a political climate, no matter any of those things, those companies just consistently do what they do best, and they don't try to be anything else.
Yeah, and the funny thing though, as you say that, I think of some of the most innovative brands. Chick-fil-A is one of those brands that comes to mind because they do dabble. And so I guess I would love to understand from your perspective, because quite frankly, all of them have dabbled. Cane's dabbles because they've got such crazy drive-through and kind of the ways that they go, even the dining room layouts. I've been into some different Cane's. I've been to quite a few Texas Roadhouse. So how do brands that are out there listening stay consistent to who they are and who they want to be and still innovate? Because we see a lot of the brands that are suffering are those brands that tried to stay who they are and didn't stay up with the time. So how do you manage that, or how would you say that brands should manage that?
It's a great question, one that I ask people all the time as well, because I think the restaurant industry especially is one that faces this question all the time. When you look at the biggest chains in America and you look at some of these brands that have been around for generations, they have a legacy to protect. They have a heritage. They have the nostalgia factor. Some of these companies where you have customers who've been coming in for 5, 6, 7 decades in some instances, and if you innovate too much, if you press too much on the accelerator, you're gonna really turn them off because this
Mhm.
is not what I expect out of that restaurant, right? And so in the restaurant industry, I do think you have a lot of those who have to be more careful with their innovation for that sake. And to answer your question, yes, of the four I mentioned, Chick-fil-A for sure has done the most consumer facing innovation of any of them, I think by a long shot. If you think about that new drive-through they opened in Georgia with, the four drive-through lanes, and it's very much like a bank, and you're lowering the food down and all that. That's about as innovative as it comes. That's
Yep.
fancy. That's super technology powered. I think Chick-fil-A has done an incredibly admirable job as far as digital innovation, their mobile app, the ways in which they continue to develop that. They're putting out content now on, with an app, right? So Chick-fil-A clearly is still pushing with innovation. And I got to tell you, Jeremy, I think to some degree that's because they have permission from their customer when they look and see that they're doing $9 million per restaurant per year, right?
Yeah.
They know that the Chick-fil-A customer isn't going to say, "Hey, wait a second, you're making content now? I disagree. I'm going to take my business elsewhere." They're not doing that, right? They're just like, "I go to Chick-fil-A all the time because I love Chick-fil-A and I'm going to keep going to Chick-fil-A." So Chick-fil-A has permission to innovate. And it's not to say that the other companies do not have that permission, but I do think they're a little bit more protective. And I'll go all the way to the other end with Texas Roadhouse. I spent a lot of time with Texas Roadhouse a few months ago. We named them our brand icon of 2024. I spent some time in their headquarters with CEO Jerry Morgan and several other executives, got into the restaurants, and when you look around at Texas Roadhouse, you're not going to see a lot of technology. You're
No.
not going to see a lot of fancy bells and whistles. You will see a lot of what Texas Roadhouse looked like 30 years ago, maybe with the exception of no more peanuts on the floor, because what they loud music, they have friendly wait staff. They have, a menu that has barely changed in 30 years, and they have moved their innovation more to the back of the house because Texas Roadhouse is like the slice of Americana that could not change. It is because every community in America that has a Texas Roadhouse, it just feels like you're stepping out of time when you go into this place. And you know that in 1996 and in 2025, the experience is going to be the same. And that's why you go there. That's what you want. But they do innovate in ways that are more employee focused, right? So
Mhm.
Texas Roadhouse recently rolled out a KDS, which has been doing wonders for them, as far as I understand it. They work on making the lives of their employees a lot easier. But they'll resist third party delivery. They'll resist a lot of the other, again, bells and whistles that are becoming popular with restaurants. And so a long-winded way of answering your question, Jeremy, is just to say I think every restaurant has to take a temperature for what their brand is and what it represents to the customer, and understand how much permission they have from the customer to innovate. Because if you don't have to put in that kiosk, if you don't have to you know build that fancy drive through because it might turn off your customers who don't expect that from you, then don't do it. It might
Yep.
not be right for you.
Yeah, no, and I was just on a show that just released this week, the week that we're recording this, and I was talking about it with Troy Hooper from Pepper Lunch, and he was asking, he's like, what do brands do that make the most mistakes? It's they don't really know who they are, and I think the undercurrent from all four of these brands is they know who they are, and they know where the innovations need to happen in order to meet their both guest expectation as well as their staff expectation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a core value thing, right? And again, not to overuse the Texas Roadhouse example, but I think some of these brands are just so good at having these core values. Again, like a blueprint. And for Texas Roadhouse, that's Kent Taylor, founder Kent Taylor, who passed away a few years ago, but he left behind this very dedicated. I mean, he wrote a book right before
Yep.
he passed. He had written a book, and it's a very detailed, dedicated plan for how you succeed, and they stick to it and they don't change the rules. And so that's where I think if you have strong core values, you have a blueprint for what the brand represents, and you don't waver from that, then you're going to do fine.
And now a word from one of our sponsors. Every restaurant operator understands the chaos of a restaurant kitchen during the meal rush. Restaurant Technologies Total Oil Management Solutions is an end-to-end automated oil management system that delivers, filters, monitors, and recycles your cooking oil, taking the dirtiest jobs out of your kitchen and letting your employees focus on more important tasks. Control the kitchen chaos with Restaurant Technologies and make your kitchen safer. No upfront cost. To learn more, check out rti-inc.com or call 888-796-4996. I love that. The other piece that I think I heard as a thread, and I'd love at least your opinion on this, and then there's a brand that I grew up with in In-N-Out, and I know quite a bit of the family. They're a very similar brand in that regard, that they know who they are and they know what they're doing. But my wife worked there, my best friend worked at In-N-Out, is their care for employees, their investment in their team. When I think about all four of those brands that you mentioned that are doing it well, something they also do is they not only know who they are as a brand and how they're going to engage with the consumer, but they invest a lot in the team members that are coming in. And in many of them, I don't even think they call them employees, they call them team members, or they have some other colloquialism that's related to that. Can you expand upon that? Because I think it's what makes the restaurant industry go is the people that are there as much as the food and the experience and the ambiance. And if you do it well, you can tell. And when you don't do it well, you can tell.
Yeah, look, it's probably become a little cliche by now, but if you take care of your employees, they will take care of your guests, right? So, especially today, when with the situation we're in with labor, where the unemployment level is very low and where it's very difficult to find good employees, everybody is trying to figure out, how do we recruit, hire, retain? And that retain part is crucial. Once you find that person who is an all-star employee or team member or whatever, you hold on to them as tightly as you can. And again, with your core values, if you have core values and you hire against those and you find candidates who are reflective of those values, then that's going to be an easy match. It's going to,
Mhm.
you're going to meld well with that customer and they're going to want to be a part of what you're building. But you've got to really then put your money where your mouth is. And that's literal money. Sometimes, of course, pay your employees well, but offer benefits. Try to invest and incentivize in these employees so that they have no incentive to leave, that they don't
Yep.
want to depart. But I would also add, try to show them the path that they have forward. I think the companies that do this best, they have developed a talent pipeline and they help their employees understand how this job could turn into a career. The restaurant industry struggled with this for a long time, and it's a topic of conversation forever, which is, how do people understand that while 50% of Americans get their job working behind the counter of a restaurant, very few of them stick around and make a career out of it, but they can, and it can be very lucrative.
Yep.
And so for those companies that I think want to leverage their team members to succeed, they've got to, again, invest in them from an incentives perspective, a pay perspective, and they have to show them the path that they could have ahead of them to becoming a leader at that company. And then again, if you do those things and your employees are happy, they feel like they belong, they're going to reflect that to your customers. And then your customers are going to be happy. In-N-Out's a great example. When they take care of their employees take care of the guests, everybody wins. Chick-fil-A is another example, and Chick-fil-A especially, you think about the people who want in on a Chick-fil-A, the many thousands of, applications they get for owner operators, and they only
Yeah.
select a handful, right? But if you get in that pipeline and you stay in that pipeline, Chick-fil-A general managers are doing, $500,000 a year. Like, again, lucrative career if you can get in that pipeline. So I think that's the key. Take care of your employees. They'll take care of your guests. Everybody wins, but you have to be very focused on what that looks like in taking care of your employees.
Yeah, and not to go towards the negative, but the opposite also has to happen. If people aren't meeting the core values, you have to make sure that they know they're not there very long. I remember
Correct.
playing golf with somebody did In-N-Out a number of years ago, young in my career, and I said, "How do you guys create what you do?" He goes, "The minute we know it's a bad apple, they are gone. It's
Yeah.
not something that and they've got a strong pipeline of people coming in. They've got a strong pipeline of knowing how to get people on board and to ingratiate them to the culture of who they are and what they do. And the people that aren't part of that culture, they stick out like a sore thumb and they're gone pretty quickly."
Totally. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and I was thinking too about how somebody told me once. I knew somebody who worked at a Chick-fil-A, and they were saying that they have like the whole local high school's honor roll working at their
Yep.
restaurant, and success begats success, right? Where when you also get those happy employees, they're going to recruit their friends to come to be a part of it. I think that again, if you just focus intensely on it, to your point, Jeremy, get rid of the bad apples, focus on the good apples. The good apples will bring in more good apples, and then that just kind of snowballs to the point where it's like you're known to be a company everybody wants to work for. You have that advantage, that unfair advantage of being everybody's banging down your door to work there, and you have kind of the pick of the litter.
Yeah, the one last thing that I would say that I recognize about all four of these brands is that they were slow to grow, and then they got fast. They
Totally.
started slow before they went fast, and I've seen too many brands that grow so far beyond. And again, you and I've been doing this almost 30 years now. I've watched brands that are so promising and they grow so fast and they forget who they are. I'd
Yep.
love a little bit of opinion on that because again, Chick-fil-A, I'd heard about it for years back in Atlanta. Never went to the first one there. And then, like they started coming west and now they're growing really fast. Same thing with Raising Cane's. They've been around for a long enough time. I went to the original Jersey Mike's as a kid. I used to grow up at the Jersey Shore,
Mhm.
and I literally used to go into that original Jersey Mike's in Point Pleasant Beach. So for me, the all of these brands that you talk about started really slow and then accelerated at a pace once they kind of figured it out.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I think this is the third time I've actually talked about this exact thing this week, which is this idea that it is a marathon, not a sprint. And I totally have been in that same place where in the last 16 years, I have watched these restaurants open up, become a little bit successful, so they grow a little bit, and then they're saying, "Okay, now we're going to open 100 next year." And
Mhm.
you're like, "No, no, that's
Yeah.
not the point. Don't
Mhm.
do that." And even when you have some chains, and I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus here, but when you look at some examples of this, I'll throw out Blaze Pizza as an
Yep.
example of fastest growing restaurant chain in history. I think they were at the time, perhaps since surpassed by Crumble Cookies, which is another story. Blaze peaked. They did 500 in 5 years, and that's great. And then now I think they're retooling now, so I hopefully they'll get back to growth again. But I guess the point is like what good is 500 in 5 years if you're not around in 50? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or
Yeah,
even in
Dickies
10.
has been getting beat up quite a bit about doing the exact same thing recently. And again, I'm not picking on Dickies. It's been
Yep.
stuff that you guys have written about, but it's very similar. Chris Demery, the CTO of Blaze, was on recently as well on the show, and he and I talked about how they had to go back to the roots of who they were and what made them successful, and go back and reinvest in those things because they were shiny object as well as grow at all costs rather than finding the right
Right.
franchisees, keeping the culture to the core.
Yeah, yeah. I think Crumble again is the latest example that we don't fully know what's going to happen there, but everybody was just so shocked at 1,000 restaurants in 6 years or something that they did. But then last year it was a little bit okay. Some of the cracks are starting to show, and I wish the best for all of these folks because I recognize these companies have thousands of employees whose livelihoods depend on that, and so wouldn't wish ill will. But I think that these things have to be a model for what other companies do. These have to be red flags that
Mhm.
growth does not have to be number of locations. I think that's such an important part. You
Yep.
can grow your culture. You can grow within your four walls. You can grow in so
Your
many
team
different
members.
ways. You can
Your team
grow your
members.
team members totally. And whether you have 5 units or 500, that's not the measure of success. The measure of success is what you're serving, how you're serving your customers, the role you play in their lives, and whether or not you can do that for the long term. So coming back to your point, yes, all of those companies that I mentioned, those four companies, Jersey Mike's, I think especially, this is a company that when I started covering this industry 16 years ago, I grew up in Ohio. I had never heard of Jersey Mike's.
Mhm.
And then they kind of pop on the radar as a sort of up and coming chain. At the time, they maybe had less than 1,000 locations. Like, okay, whatever. What's this about? I tried it. I loved it. And now they're getting sold for $8 billion, and they're opening 200 to 300 a year. And it's 50 years in the making. And Peter Cancro is one of the industry's, one of the absolute titans of this industry. Everybody should learn from Peter Cancro and what he accomplished at Jersey Mike's. And that was one of the big things. I think he was just really patient. He took care of his people. They have an amazing culture at Jersey Mike's. When you get to know their executives, you know that they know who they are and what they're doing, and that gave them the ability by really kind of being patient in that growth to slam down on that accelerator. Once they got to that point where they felt like they could.
Love that. I appreciate you sharing those stories. And again, not looking to pick on any of those people, but I'm going to flip it around and say, so now I'm one of those brands, and let's live in the casual dining space because
Yeah.
there's been a lot written about casual dining. It's been, taking punches in the mouth. There's been some that have been successful. You talked about Texas Roadhouse. I know you guys have written about Brinker and Olive Garden still doing relatively well in the space overall. But now I'm one of those brands, and I'm looking to get back to being more successful. They got kicked in the teeth with COVID. We had a little bit of a renaissance there post COVID, and now it's back to traffic is down. We're not growing. We're really struggling. What is the commonality, or what are the things that you're seeing within casual dining that brands need to be evaluating and aware of in order to get back to not just growth, but to being successful and feeling like they're in a good spot?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll give you a couple of examples. The first one I'll say is someone I spoke to this week who will be a guest on my podcast takeaway here in a few weeks is Barry McGowan, the CEO of Fogo to Show. And talk about patience.
Yeah.
Barry joined Fogo 12 years ago. And it's another brand that like for me, I was not really familiar with Fogo maybe 5 years ago. And then they started to creep up onto my radar. I'm like, what's this Brazilian brand? What's this all about? And now, and I think I can say this because it'll be live, I'm sure by the time this episode goes up, they're on the cover of our January issue because they are one of America's favorite chains. We partnered with Technomic on our America's Favorite Chains report. Fogo, I believe, was number 7 on the top 10, and they were also Gen Z's number 1 full service restaurant.
Wow.
And
That's
here Barry,
incredible.
it's incredible. I mean, and that's a
Because
testament
it's not
to
an inexpensive brand to go to. And I'm
exactly
not saying that to pick on anybody, but everybody talks about price being one of
right.
the barriers, and everybody took price too high. So I apologize for stopping you, but
No.
I think it's something that they're charging a premium, but they're delivering a product that's different. So sorry, I'll let you keep going.
No, totally. And that was exactly what I said to Barry. I'm like, how do you resonate with Gen Z when you're a more upscale, expensive option? And it's a number of things, as he says, it's the experience. Fogo gives a little bit of more of a choose your own adventure experience. It's the quality. It's the fact that it's a global brand with some really new kind of flavors that people aren't expecting. Certainly, it's in the hospitality. There's a vibe to it. And as he and I were talking, so I live in Columbus, and about 2 minutes from my house, they're building a Fogo. It's going to open here in the next month or two, and I've never been, so I'm very excited for this. And this was so reflective to me of the casual dining space. And I told Barry this on the podcast, which is they're building the Fogo in an old O'Charlie's, and that was like that's so indicative, I think, of what the casual dining space is right now. And again, not to pick on O'Charlie's, but O'Charlie's, here's a concept that's a little bit tired, a little bit of your standard kind of casual, sort of sports bar kind of
Yeah, barish
vibe.
food. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's American menu. Those are dime a dozen, those kind of concepts. And last year they closed several, including the one by my house. And Fogo is building, and I think Fogo is just going to kill in this location because it's more of the moment. It's more what people are looking for. And I think I would compare it to, especially in the sports bar category, something like Twin Peaks. So Twin Peaks, regardless what you think about their hospitality model, they have an incredible food and beverage platform. Their food is really good and
Yes.
their bar menu is super expansive. They have something for everybody. And Joe Hummel, their CEO, will tell you they don't want to be your average sports bar with the local jerseys on the wall. They want to be the place that you come and you have a phenomenal experience. There's like 200 TVs in every one of them. So there's something that you want to watch, but they take you seriously. They take their guests seriously by giving them great food and beverage. And so again, indicative for me of where casual dining is going is that the bar is set high.
Mhm.
You have to provide great food and beverage. The last example I'll give you is Gustavo Group out of Denver. And so this is a group that only operates within Colorado. Recently spoke with Peter Newland, one of the partners there, and you can listen to that on my podcast. But he talked about how this is a restaurant group with a few concepts. Homegrown is one of theirs, a pizza place, Park Burger. And they are very committed to the suburbs, but they're also very committed to doing these sort of local concepts only within Colorado. And his whole point was on experience, that they want to go and build a casual dining experience that is of the community, of the people in that neighborhood. Because to his point, he said, if you look at the suburbs, you just have a lot of really standard chains
Yep.
and they're all very similar trade dress. They're all very kind of cookie cutter, not to say that's totally that way, but he saw this opportunity to say, well, let's build something that feels like an independent restaurant, even though they have multiple units. And then people are going to go there because they get that experience of feeling like I'm at a restaurant that's reflective of my community, my personality, the kind of brand I want. And then they have great food and beverage. So those are the examples I would give you for the casual space in terms of the bar is high. Don't just do the cookie cutter experience, do something a little bit different or at least better.
Yeah. Well, and I think what I heard you say through that whole thread, Sam, was the fact that each one of these people, even including the first four brands, is they were constantly reinvesting in who they were and testing different things that were going out there. So, how do people do that successfully so they don't run into the problem that you said at O'Charlie's that I want my Monte Cristo sandwich because I've had that Monte Cristo sandwich since 1953 and I want that sandwich and and again I'm being a little bit dramatic about it, but we've all had those situations where we would go with our parents or our grandparents and it was always that place that you went with them, and they have to modify the menu, they have to change, but if they change too much they lose both ends of the spectrum. So I guess how would you recommend our listeners that are out there think about that?
Yeah, it's a great point. One thing that Peter Newland of Gustavo Group told me is, he said you have to remember that your restaurant is a living, breathing organism, and
Love
so I
that.
think one point is that you do have to constantly evolve. Even though I recognize that's a little bit counter to what I was saying earlier, where you have to be consistent. You do have to evolve because I think if you feel like you're too much stuck in the past, people will recognize that too. And so if you're not a brand that is known for its innovation, because one I would say, by the way, we had to set as kind of a North Star when it comes to innovation, I'm going to say is Taco Bell.
Yep.
When it comes to a company that has license from its customers to do whatever the heck they want, it's
Uh-huh.
Taco Bell.
Yeah.
Which I think we should all be jealous of because I think they're having the most fun in this entire industry. But they get away with that because that's the expectation of the customer. And if you're not Taco Bell, but you're not Texas Roadhouse, I think that you have to try to slowly test some of these things. And of course, if it's a menu, try it on a limited basis, either across the system or just choose, maybe you have a couple corporate locations that you can just kind of test a few of these things. But especially, again, going back to some of the technology, especially that can improve the efficiency of your employees, your back of house. I think you can roll that out over time. Don't overwhelm your employees. Don't confuse them. But it makes some of these changes at a patient pace. Again, going back to patience, and just be ready to fail fast, right? So if it's
Yeah.
it's not a part of your brand and it's not going to work, to your point about employees, get it out fast
Yeah.
because you need to pivot and choose something else. But you will suffer if you don't try, which I think is what Peter was saying, that it's a living, breathing organism.
Well, and I love you talked about evolution. That takes time, that takes iterations, that's just constantly iterating versus some revolution where, and we've all seen these brands where they're going to put a new facelift on it. They throw a new logo outside, they paint the building, and then the entire menu is changed versus changing 10% or 20% of the menu and evolving over time. And so
Yeah.
I love that idea. Um, Changing gears here for just a minute. It is the Restaurant Technology Guys podcast after all. Where do you see 2025 investment in technology going? Where do you see the majority of the time, energy, and money spent as it relates to brands? Because I think, we, and that's a very broad question, but I say it because I think that a lot of people get shiny object syndrome in
Yeah.
our industry, whether that's I got to have wings because wings are the hot thing, or I got to have Greek food because Greek food's the hot thing, or
Yeah.
whatever those are on the menu selection. They do the same thing with tech. But where do you see things working well and 2024 coming into 2025? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, if I had to guess, and it's kind of similar to what I've been saying before, which is I think it's going to be tech that makes the employees' lives easier because I think everybody's trying to solve for labor.
Yep.
And everybody recognizes the potential that technology has in solving for labor, whether that's replacing employees, with a kiosk or whatever, or whether that's being able to reallocate your labor with technology, or ultimately complementing your employees with technology. That's the trend I think I see the most of, which is how do we adopt technology in the kitchen, behind the counter, at the drive-through window that doesn't necessarily do the job of the employee, but makes it so that it's easier, it's perhaps even more fun, that they can enjoy it, that they can, maybe take the opportunity to provide more hospitality because the technology's picked up some of what they're doing. If I had to give an extreme example, I think about Donato's here in Columbus. Donato's developed this kind of robotic equipment to assemble their pizzas. I don't think they've scaled that too
They
far
haven't
yet.
yet. Kevin was actually I recorded a show with him last week, the CEO. He and I were
Nice.
talking about. So it's actually coming, I think, in Q1. He said it's very, very soon. So
Yeah.
probably by the time both of these shows are out, he'll have his full robot. He'll have his
That's
full
great.
robot. And I think it's inside the airport, right? I think that's
Yeah,
so that's where his first store is going to be with the robot. So sorry, I mean,
that's
it's
great.
just
No,
literally you brought that concept up, and he was just on the show last week.
intuition. I got you,
I
Jeremy.
love that.
Yeah, and I got to go last year. I think it was last year, maybe the year before. They did a celebration at their original location where they were testing this equipment. And again, it's a little bit more extreme, but their idea was, if you have this robotic equipment that's slicing the pepperoni and putting it on, their whole commitment is 100 pepperonis on a pepperoni pizza. So, but it can do that very efficiently. There's one that does the sauce, one that does the cheese. Not only is it making your pizza very consistently, but again, it's essentially the employee has to press a button and then move it on to the next one. And they said, this is not make the whole kitchen a robot, and so I don't need any kitchen employees. This is suddenly people want to work at Donato's a little bit more because it's not super challenging work, and you're not, having that kind of laborious type of work that you might have had in the past with a pizza shop. So that's an example of where I think that the technology will continue to go in, and it doesn't have to be robotics. I should also add, right? Maybe this is just equipment that's digitized, and the timers, and this stuff's been around for a while, but like that will continue to evolve and say, how do we automate as much of this as possible for the employee so that they can be happier, so that we can do a better job recruiting and people know they can come here and not, they can enjoy their work, and that we've supported them through this technology. So that'd be my guess. I think, to your point, the shiny object syndrome, there's a place for kiosks. There's a place for, anything digital, phone, mobile based. But if you look at the extreme on that side with like the metaverse, where a couple of years we all thought customers were going to be, engaged in the metaverse, and it was, yeah, that's like, whoa, what were we thinking? Like, no, they're not going to do that. So don't push too far. Don't go into these wackadoodle ideas. Give them something that fits the concept, and then especially I would just suggest, again, technology going into the back of house and kitchen to help your employees.
Yeah, one last piece about employee engagement that we've seen a lot of, and I'd love your opinion on it, is things that make the employees' lives easier outside of the four walls. We
Mm,
know that a lot of employees have gotten stuck with, a lot of employees have left for the gig economy because they can work when they want to work. They can change their shifts. They can come on. They can get paid the same day that they went and did delivery for DoorDash or Uber Eats or Amazon for that matter. We're seeing people, more and more brands looking at getting same day pay, getting access in casual dining to their tips same day. When I grew up in the restaurants, 30 years ago, I used to walk home with hundreds of dollars in cash in my pocket. No longer is that the case, and restaurants are really struggling to keep up with that. Nowadays, figuring out how to allow them to change shifts, communicate with each other about their shifts, as well as get access to their pay through some HR that's integrated to the store. Have you seen brands doing that? We're seeing it. I would love your thoughts on that, because again, it's a retention tool. It's a engagement tool. It's a tool to make their lives easier when they can't work or need time off or whatever else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're seeing brands go in that direction too, and a lot of that is listen to employee, right? Listen to what they need, what they want, and stay in tuned with what kind of technology you have at your fingertips to be able to accommodate that. So a lot of these platforms popped up to facilitate that same day pay, and so yes, if there's not a downside to that necessarily, I'm sure there are some, but like at this point in time, you do not have the luxury to not incentivize employees, right? You
Yep.
really have to give them all of these things. If you've maxed out on what you can pay them on an hourly basis, because I'm sure, Jeremy, you have this as well as I do at all the fast food restaurants around me. There's decals in the window talking about $16, $17 an hour. If you can't continue to max that out and compete with everybody, compete on another front, and that's same day pay. Maybe I think Starbucks recent update of its benefits for employees, which especially includes parental leave. They give now, I believe, 18 weeks for birth parents and 12 weeks for non-birth parents. I mean, that's better than a lot of corporations
Yeah.
will give you, right? For parental leave. And Starbucks, of course, for its scale, can get away with something like that. Maybe a smaller, a mid-size or emerging chain can't do that. But these are the things you have to be thinking about. Do you have parents on your team? How do you give them flexible hours so that they can take care of their kids? What do you have, young people who maybe need some help going to college? That's another thing Starbucks has been doing, which
Yep.
is paying for a digital program. So I don't think we're in this day and age anymore where you can just assume teenagers need jobs, they're going to come to me for a job. You have to be out there aggressively competing for talent, because it will benefit you in the long run, as we talked about earlier, and you are going to have to get pretty competitive with what you're offering.
Love it. Sam, I'm gonna stop here just because I know typically when we get to about that 30-minute mark, people start to fall off. But how do people engage? How do people learn more about how to stay connected with you, the brands? I mean, you guys have so much. As you said, your staff is so prolific, and I love genuinely, I it's like part of how I start my day every day is reading what it is that you and your team have put out there. So how do they engage? How do they get on the newsletter? How do they get with the daily emails and the magazine and all of that?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jeremy. Thank you. So go to nrn.com, the easiest way to do all of this. If you go to nrn.com, we have a subscribe button on there. You can subscribe to our AM newsletter, which is every weekday. We have a range of other newsletters that will give you the option to subscribe to as well. Some for fast casual, some for QSR, some for casual dining. So we have a range of newsletters you can subscribe to, so you get in your inbox all the news and information that you could possibly need. We also do, as I mentioned, have a print publication. So we have a monthly edition of Nation's Restaurant News that you can subscribe to. If you're a qualified restaurant operator, you get it for free. So highly recommend people do that. But go subscribe to Takeaway with Sam Oches, my podcast. Subscribe to Extra Serving, which is our flagship NRN podcast. And then you can also follow me on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with you.
Awesome. Last one, just shows that you guys are putting on, because I know
Yeah.
that that's also. I mean, I ran into you at FS Tech in September, but I know that you guys have got lots of different places that you're out in the public sphere. So if people want to engage in any of those opportunities, where would you suggest they go?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're incredibly lucky to be a part of a group called Informa Connect Food Service, which has come together in the last 2 years. And so we own several events for the restaurant operator. The next one coming up is Restaurant Leadership Conference, and that's
Amazing
in
show.
Scottsdale in April. Yeah, that's a good one. And if you just Google Restaurant Leadership Conference, you can find it and request an invite. After that, there's the National Restaurant Association show in May, which is a part of our portfolio. Of course, the biggest food show, I believe, in the world. That's a trade show. So if you're looking for new ideas and inspiration, it's a great place to be. After that, we have FS Tech, which is in September. This year, I believe, in Orlando. FS Tech is, if you are in the tech space, that is the place to be. Food service tech is obviously continuing to change every year, so there's lots to learn about there. And the final one I'd throw at you is Create. So
Yep.
we launched this a few years ago. Create is in October in Nashville. That's for emerging operators. So don't put a number requirement on it, but I typically say if you have between 2 and 200 locations, Create is the event for you.
Awesome. Sam, thank you so much for what you guys do every day. Again, the purpose of the show is really to help restaurants to succeed. And I know you guys are on that same path. So to our listeners, guys, we know you guys have lots of choices. So thank you guys for hanging out. If you haven't already subscribed to the show, please do so and make it a great day. Awesome. Thank you.